every detail. As a billionaire, his reputation was one of sharp judgment and ruthless decision-making. Richard was known to be exacting, his preferences stringent and his standards almost impossible to meet. To him, the success of his vast business network depended not only on money and strategy, but on controlling the environment, including the people who stood closest to him. Behind his polished smile and perfectly tailored suits was a man who trusted very few and held tightly to his old-fashioned beliefs. His office was a fortress, where decisions were made with little room for error or challenge, and where certain types of people were quietly but firmly kept at a distance. In that office, Maya Johnson's type simply didn't belong. But life, as it often does, has a way of challenging even the most deeply held convictions. On one particularly rainy afternoon, as the city streets shimmered with reflections of gray skies and hurried footsteps, the door to Richard's office opened, and she walked in. Maya Johnson entered the room with a quiet confidence that immediately drew attention. She was radiant, her presence filling the space in a way that no one expected. She carried herself with a dignity and strength that defied the unspoken rule. Maya was everything Richard's no curvy black women rule forbade, and yet she was here. There was something about her that could not be ignored, a combination of intelligence, warmth, and an undeniable aura of self-worth. Little did anyone know at that moment, Maya was not just there to apply for a job. She was there to rewrite the rules. But instead of letting those barriers define her, Maya used them as fuel to push harder, to rise above expectations, and to build a life on her own terms. Her resume was impeccable, marked by years of hard work, impressive achievements, and leadership roles that showcased her ability to manage pressure and deliver results. But what made Maya truly stand out was her attitude. Richard, on the other hand, found himself studying her closely. The rules he had lived by for decades suddenly seemed less clear. He saw something different in Maya, something he had not expected. The very presence of Maya Johnson was a challenge to the carefully constructed world Richard had built. It was a challenge not just to him, but to the culture of exclusion that had kept people like her on the outside for too long. That rainy afternoon marked the beginning of a shift. It was the moment when an unspoken rule was about to be broken, not with noise or conflict, but with the quiet power of courage and determination. As Maya spoke about her vision, her skills, and her belief in the strength of diversity, the atmosphere in the room began to change. It was subtle at first, but unmistakable. The billionaire's kingdom, once rigid and unyielding, was about to open its gates. Maya stepped out of the elevator and took a deep breath. This was it, the moment she had worked so hard for. The polished floors gleamed under her shoes as she walked confidently down the hallway, her heart steady despite the nervous flutter in her chest. She had heard the stories. Everyone at the company knew Richard Carlton's reputation. The billionaire was a man who ran his empire with ruthless precision, and his office was a place where only a certain type of person was welcomed. The unspoken rule was clear. Curvy black women were not part of that inner circle. Maya knew she didn't fit the mold Richard had long preferred, but she wasn't here to be anyone's stereotype. Her resume was impressive. Years of leadership roles, flawless project management, and glowing recommendations followed her. But Maya understood that qualifications alone wouldn't get her through the door. It was her attitude, her presence, and the way she carried herself that could tip the balance. When the assistant called her name, Maya straightened her jacket, smoothed her hair, and walked into the sleek office where Richard Carlton sat behind an imposing mahogany desk. His eyes were sharp and calculating as he sized her up. The air was thick with unspoken judgment. Richard's voice was steady but cool as he began the interview. "Miss Johnson, your credentials are impressive, but I have to be honest. Our firm has a particular image we maintain. We prefer candidates who fit a certain profile." Maya's eyes met his without hesitation. "I understand, sir, but I believe success comes from embracing diversity and valuing unique perspectives." Richard's lips twitched, almost as if to suppress a smile, or maybe surprise. He leaned forward slightly, intrigued. "Explain that." Maya took a breath and spoke with clarity. "I've faced barriers throughout my career because of who I am. But I've always used those challenges to sharpen my skills and broaden my understanding. I'm confident that my experiences and insights can bring value here, not despite my background, but because of it." The tension in the room shifted. Richard was not used to candidates who challenged his expectations with such grace and confidence. Maya's words hung in the air, inviting him to reconsider. Over the next hour, Maya answered every question with professionalism and honesty. She didn't try to fit into any preconceived mold. Instead, she showcased her strengths and her vision for how she could contribute to the company's success. Richard found himself increasingly impressed. Her intelligence was sharp, her demeanor composed, and her passion unmistakable. Yet old habits die hard. He reminded himself of the rules, the carefully guarded boundaries that had kept the company culture consistent for decades. When the interview ended, Richard stood and extended his hand. "Thank you, Maya. We'll be in touch." As she walked out of the office, Maya felt a mixture of relief and anticipation. She knew this was only the beginning of a much larger challenge. Days passed. Maya's name circulated quietly through the company's corridors. Some whispered doubts, others curiosity. The old biases ran deep, but so did the growing recognition of Maya's talent. Finally, the call came. She had the job. Maya's first days were a whirlwind of learning, adjusting, and proving herself. The office was filled with... One afternoon, Richard summoned Maya to his office. He was quieter than usual, his gaze less sharp. "Maya," he began, "you've done more than just fill a role here. You've changed the way I see things." Maya smiled, feeling the weight of those words. She knew the road ahead was still long, but this was a powerful start. The billionaire's rules were no longer as unbreakable as they once seemed. Richard Carlton, the billionaire known for being cold, calculated, and unshakable, began calling on Maya more often. At first, it was for routine tasks, coordinating meetings, preparing reports, managing investor decks. But soon, it became clear that Richard wasn't just relying on her for administrative support. He was leaning on her judgment. Maya's suggestions started shaping high-level decisions. She anticipated problems before they happened and handled delicate situations with a calm, strategic mind. She didn't speak just to impress. She spoke with purpose, and people listened. Richard began inviting her into meetings, usually reserved for executives. At first, the room would go silent when she entered, the stares lingering just a beat too long. But she stood her ground, pen in hand, notes sharp, voice steady. Her presence, once controversial, was now impossible to ignore. Some of the senior staff weren't happy. They remembered the rules. One executive even whispered during a lunch meeting, "She doesn't belong in that office." Another laughed and added, "Give it time. He'll snap back to his old ways." But he didn't. One day, Richard was reviewing a multi-million-dollar acquisition proposal with his legal and finance teams. Numbers were flying across the screen, and tension was building. The acquisition looked solid on paper. But Maya, sitting quietly in the back, furrowed her brow. "Sir," she said, raising her voice just enough to cut through the room, "can I point out something?" Richard turned toward her, mildly surprised, but gave her a nod. Maya walked to the front, took a marker, and circled a clause in the contract. "This vendor has a lawsuit pending in another state. If we buy them out now, we inherit that liability. I cross-checked the name last night when prepping the background brief." Silence. The legal head looked stunned. "She's right." Richard stared at the document, then at Maya. "How did you catch that?" "I've seen similar red flags before," she replied. "I always double-check when deals look too smooth." That moment changed everything. Not only had Maya saved the company from a potential disaster, but she had also proven something more powerful. That her presence in the room wasn't just justified, it was essential. Later that evening, Richard called Maya into his office. The rain was tapping softly against the tall windows, and the city lights glowed in the distance. Richard was quiet for a moment, looking out over his empire. "You know," he began, his voice unusually reflective, "I built this company by controlling everything. I thought predictability was the key to power. That if I kept everything inside the lines I drew, nothing could go wrong." Maya stood quietly, listening. "But then you walked in," he continued, "and everything I thought I knew shifted. I had a rule. One I never spoke out loud, but followed like law. You didn't just challenge that rule, you dismantled it." Maya took a breath. "With all due respect, sir, I didn't come here to change your mind. I came here to do my job and do it well." Richard nodded, and that's exactly what did it. He leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "This company needs more people like you, not just for your skills, but for your perspective. You see things others don't. You say things others won't. That's not just valuable, it's necessary." For the first time, Maya saw something in Richard's eyes that had never been there before: respect. That moment marked a turning point, not just in Maya's career, but in the culture of the company. Slowly, the walls that had once excluded people like her began to crumble. The rules were changing, not with loud announcements or corporate statements, but with the quiet force of undeniable excellence. Change, even when it's necessary, never comes easily. While Richard Carlton had started to shift his views, the rest of the company wasn't as quick to follow. The whispers behind Maya's back grew louder. Some brushed off her success as a lucky break. Others accused her of being Richard's new favorite, using the language of jealousy and bitterness to hide their discomfort. But Maya didn't flinch. She knew this wasn't just about her. It was about breaking down decades of exclusion. The real challenge began when Richard announced his decision to restructure the executive team and named Maya as part of the new leadership advisory group. It was unofficial at first, no title, no grand announcement, but it was a seat at the table. And to some, that was unacceptable. A senior manager, a man who had been with the company since its early days, spoke up in a leadership meeting. "With all due respect," he said, glancing toward Maya, "I think we need to be careful about changing too much, too fast. Our strength comes from consistency, from people who understand the culture." The word culture hung in the air like a warning. Maya met his gaze without blinking. If consistency means staying silent while talent is overlooked, maybe it's time for a new kind of culture. Some in the room shifted uncomfortably. Others, surprisingly, nodded. Richard leaned forward. "What Maya said is exactly why she's here. We've been consistent, yes, but also stagnant. Maya brings something we've been missing: perspective, agility, and courage." It was a defining moment, one that made it clear Maya was no longer just a new hire climbing the ranks. She was becoming a force of change within the company. but change always has its enemies. In the following weeks, Maya faced subtle acts of sabotage. Emails accidentally deleted, meetings rescheduled without notice, cold stares in the hallway. Someone even started a rumor that she was only rising because of diversity optics, not merit. She had every reason to walk away, to say it wasn't worth it. But Maya had fought too hard to get here, and she wasn't going to let bitterness win. Instead of reacting emotionally, she stayed professional. Every attack was met with grace. Every challenge became an opportunity to prove, again and again, that she deserved her place. She didn't retaliate, she delivered. When a high-stakes investor presentation nearly fell apart due to incomplete data, Maya stepped in last minute, gathered the team, filled in the gaps herself, and helped secure a $20 million deal. The investors later said her leadership in that moment was the reason they signed. That was the final blow to the resistance. The narrative that she was just a face crumbled under the weight of her actual results. And through it all, Richard watched, silent at times, but observant. He saw how Maya carried herself through storms most couldn't even name. One afternoon, he invited her for a walk through the company's innovation floor, a space he rarely visited himself. As they walked past engineers, designers, and project teams, he turned to her and said something unexpected. "Do you know what I feared the most when you first walked into my office?" Maya glanced at him. "What's that?" "That if I gave you a real chance, you'd prove me wrong. And that once you did, I'd never be able to go back to the way things were." He paused, then smiled. "And I was right." Maya smiled back, but said nothing. She didn't need to. The moment spoke for itself. That day, Richard did something he'd never done before. He asked her to help lead the company's diversity and leadership initiative, a project that would identify, recruit, and elevate more voices like hers from within and outside the company. Not as a symbolic gesture, but as a new pillar of the company's future. Thanks for watching. If you found Maya's story inspiring, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more powerful stories that challenge the odds. Comment below, what part of Maya's journey moved you the most? I'd love to hear your thoughts. And share this video with friends who need a little motivation today. See you in the next video.